"Sir, I can make your son walk again," said the homeless girl to the millionaire. And just like that, his entire world changed. She was barefoot, covered in dirt, and claimed she knew something doctors didn't. At first, he thought it was a cruel joke, until his wheelchair-bound son smiled for the first time in months. Who was this mysterious girl with nothing to her name? And how did she unlock something no one else could? What secret was she carrying? And why did it feel like she knew his son better than anyone ever had? This isn't just a story about healing. It's about guilt, redemption, and the bond between the forgotten and the broken. What happens when a girl society left behind becomes the one person who can save everything? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The glass doors of the Wellington Neurological Clinic whispered shut behind Cale Varon as he stepped out into the gray London afternoon. His son Tim lay quiet in his arms, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The soft fabric did little to warm the chill that had settled in Cale's chest after another failed consultation. Tim's small face remained expressionless, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the rain-streaked street. Those eyes, so much like Elena's, held a depth of understanding that broke Cale's heart. 6 years old and already so resigned to disappointment. "The car is ready, Mr. Varon," called James, his driver, holding an oversized black umbrella against the strengthening downpour. The sleek town car idled at the curb, its dark paint reflecting the stormy sky like polished obsidian. Cale adjusted Tim in his arms, tucking the blanket more securely around his son's thin shoulders. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the pavement and sending small rivers coursing along the gutters. He took a step toward the waiting vehicle, his Italian leather shoes splashing through a puddle. That's when she appeared. The girl materialized from between two parked cars like a spirit rising from the wet asphalt. She couldn't have been more than 12, though something in her eyes spoke of years beyond her age. Her bare feet were caked with mud. Her clothes, clearly stolen or salvaged from charity bins, clung to her rail-thin frame. Dark hair hung in wet ropes around a face that managed to look both fierce and vulnerable at the same time. She planted herself directly in Cale's path. "Miss, you need to step aside," James said, moving forward with the umbrella. Behind him, Marcus, the security guard who accompanied them to all medical appointments, tensed and reached inside his jacket. Cale's lip curled slightly. He'd seen enough street children in London to know how this went. The sad story, the pleading eyes, the request for money that would likely go straight to drugs or alcohol. He shifted Tim's weight, preparing to step around her. But the girl didn't move. Rain streamed down her face, but she didn't blink. She didn't reach out her hand. She didn't even shiver, though she had to be freezing. Instead, she looked straight into Cale's eyes and spoke 5 words that stopped him cold. "Sir, I can make your son walk again." The confidence in her voice was startling. No begging, no uncertainty. Just a simple statement of fact, delivered with the kind of authority that Cale himself used in board meetings. Marcus stepped forward, his broad shoulders filling Cale's peripheral vision. "That's enough. Move along before—" A tug at Cale's coat stopped him from giving Marcus the nod to remove the girl. He looked down to find Tim's fingers clutched in the expensive wool of his lapel. His son's face had changed, showing more animation than Cale had seen in months. Tim's whisper was so soft it was nearly lost in the sound of falling rain. "She's like me." Cale's breath caught in his throat. Tim rarely spoke unprompted these days, and he never reached out to strangers. Yet something about this bedraggled girl had pierced through his son's usual detachment. Before Cale could process this unprecedented reaction, the girl moved. Her motion was quick but unthreatening as she reached into her sodden coat. Marcus tensed again, but she paid him no attention. Her hand emerged holding something small and round. With surprising gentleness, she placed a clay disc in Tim's lap. Cale stared at it, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. The disc was cracked, its surface worn smooth in places, but the etched design was unmistakable. A sun with 3 spirals radiating from its center. Elena's symbol. His late wife had drawn it everywhere, in her journals, on her therapy notes, even on the walls of her treatment center. She'd called it her healing sun, claiming it represented the 3 paths to wellness: body, mind, and spirit. The sight of it here in the hands of this mysterious child sent a jolt through Cale's system that had nothing to do with the cold rain. Questions crowded his tongue. Who are you? How do you know this symbol? Did you know Elena? But before he could voice any of them, the girl was gone. She didn't run exactly. It was more like she melted away, slipping between the parked cars and into a narrow alley with the fluid grace of a street cat. In seconds, she had vanished into the gray curtain of rain as if she'd never existed. Cale stood frozen, rain now falling freely on his exposed head, as James tried unsuccessfully to position the umbrella over both him and Tim. The clay disc felt impossibly heavy in Tim's lap, its presence as shocking as a burning coal. His son's small fingers traced the spirals with surprising precision, following their paths again and again. Tim's face remained turned toward the alley where the girl had disappeared, and Cale could have sworn he saw something new in his son's eyes, a spark of interest, maybe even hope. The rain continued to pour, soaking through Cale's expensive suit, but he couldn't move. He stood there, disturbed and confused, as water dripped from his chin and cars splashed past on the wet street. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical thing, heavy with implications he couldn't yet understand. High above London's rain-slicked streets, Cale carried Tim through their penthouse apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of the city's twinkling lights through sheets of rain. The space was immaculate, all clean lines, modern furniture, and carefully curated art pieces that cost more than most people's homes. But tonight, Cale barely noticed the expensive surroundings. His attention was fixed on Tim, who hadn't let go of the mysterious clay disc since the moment the strange girl had placed it in his lap. In Tim's bedroom, Cale helped his son change into soft pajamas, noting how Tim kept the disc clutched in one hand throughout the entire process. The room was spacious, but sparsely decorated, more like a hospital suite than a child's bedroom. Medical equipment lined one wall, monitors, backup generators, and various therapy tools that rarely saw use anymore. "Time to sleep, Tim," Cale said softly, pulling back the covers of the specially designed bed. Tim climbed in without protest, but instead of assuming his usual position, flat on his back, arms at his sides, he curled onto his side, wrapping himself around the clay disc like it was a precious teddy bear. His small fingers continued to trace the spiral pattern, just as they had done in the car ride home. Cale stood in the doorway watching. Something about the scene felt wrong, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Tim never slept on his side. Tim never clutched objects. Tim never... He shook his head, trying to clear it. The rain tapped against the windows, a steady rhythm that usually helped soothe him. Tonight, it only added to his unease. Making his way down the hallway, Cale stopped at a storage closet he hadn't opened in years. The door stuck slightly, another sign of neglect. Inside, stacked among boxes of financial records and old tech equipment, sat a cardboard box marked Elena Mira Center in his late wife's flowing handwriting. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it. The box wasn't heavy, but the weight of memories it contained made his arms ache. He carried it to his home office, setting it on the massive glass desk that dominated the room. For a long moment, Cale just stared at it. The box was dusty, the tape yellow with age. He'd sealed it himself 3 years ago, the day after he'd made the decision to shut down Elena's passion project, the Mira Center for Holistic Child Neurotherapy. Finally, he broke the seal. The contents spilled out like ghosts from the past. Brochures printed on recycled paper, handwritten notes on colorful stationery, photographs of smiling children and grateful parents. And there, on the cover of a worn pamphlet, was the symbol. Exactly like the one on Tim's clay disc. 3 spirals emerging from a central sun, drawn in warm oranges and yellows. Cale picked up the brochure with unsteady hands. The memory hit him like a physical force. Elena standing in her office at the Mira Center, her dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight. She was explaining the symbol to him, her eyes bright with passion. "It's not just a logo, Cale. It's a reminder of how healing works. 3 spirals, body, mind, and spirit, all connected, all flowing into each other, like cycles of hope. He'd nodded, pretending to understand, but his mind had been on quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. Always something more important, always something that couldn't wait. Another memory surfaced, this one even more painful. A sunny day at the center, children laughing as they worked through their therapy exercises. Elena was on the floor with them, her medical degree and prestigious research career forgotten as she helped a little boy stack blocks. The joy on her face was radiant. Kyle had been there too, standing in the corner, phone pressed to his ear as he argued with investors. Elena had caught his eye, gestured for him to join them. He'd held up one finger. Just a minute. Just one more call. How many moments like that had he missed? How many chances to be present, to understand what Elena was building? His hands moved mechanically through the box's contents. Patient files, progress reports, grant applications, all testament to Elena's vision of a different kind of therapy center. One that treated the whole child, not just the symptoms. One that made space for hope and play alongside the hard work of healing. Near the bottom of the box, a manila folder caught his attention. Inside was an early draft of the center's mission statement, the margins filled with Elena's distinctive handwriting. Most of the notes were routine observations, but one made Cale's heart stop. The girl with spark eyes, remember her, she's going to teach us someday. The words blurred as Cale stared at them. Could it be? That girl in the rain, with her fierce gaze and impossible confidence. Could she be the same child Elena had noticed all those years ago? The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows as Cale slowly closed the box. The digital clock on his desk glowed in the darkness. 3:23 a.m. The morning sun struggled to pierce London's perpetual cloud cover as Cale's town car pulled up to a modest brick building in Westminster. He checked the address from Elena's old records again, though he'd memorized it hours ago. Dr. Marin's former residence looked exactly as the Mira Center's personnel files had described, a pre-war walk-up with ivy climbing its weathered walls. Kyle straightened his tie, a habit born of countless business meetings. But this wasn't a business meeting, he reminded himself. The clay disc sat heavy in his coat pocket, a constant reminder of why he'd canceled his morning board meeting, something he hadn't done in years. The building's front entrance buzzed him in and he climbed the narrow stairs to the third floor. A worn brass number 12 marked Dr. Marin's old flat. He knocked, adjusting his posture to project confidence he didn't quite feel. The door opened to reveal an elderly woman in a floral housecoat. Not Marin. The woman peered at him through thick glasses. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Dr. Marin," Cale said, keeping his voice professionally neutral. "She used to live here." "Oh, she moved years ago, dear, right after that medical center closed down." The woman's face brightened with recognition. "The children's place, wasn't it?" Such a shame about that. Cale managed not to wince. "Do you know where I might find her now?" The woman hesitated, studying him more carefully. "Well, she runs a little clinic over in Hackney, one of those community health centers." She shuffled inside and returned with a scrap of paper. "Here's the address, though she might not thank me for giving it out." 20 minutes later, Cale's driver navigated through Hackney's narrow streets, finally stopping before a squat concrete building. Faded letters above the door read, "Community Wellness Center." The waiting room inside was cramped but clean, with mismatched chairs and outdated magazines scattered across a coffee table. Children's drawings covered one wall, bright crayon scenes of families and homes and sunshine. A young receptionist looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Dr. Marin," Kyle said, noting how out of place his bespoke suit looked in these surroundings. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but..." "I'm afraid Dr. Marin is fully booked today. I could schedule you for next week. Tell her it's about Nia." The receptionist's fingers froze over her keyboard. She studied him for a long moment, then disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only." Minutes later, a woman emerged, tall and straight-backed despite her gray hair, wearing a practical cardigan over medical scrubs. Dr. Marin's eyes were sharp as she assessed him, and Cale felt suddenly exposed despite his expensive armor. "Mr. Varon," she said, no warmth in her voice. "I wondered if you'd ever find your way here." "Dr. Marin," he extended his hand. She didn't take it. "Come to shut down another clinic?" Her tone was mild, but the words cut deep. "I need to talk to you about one of your former patients. All my patient records are confidential." She turned to leave. "Wait." Cale reached into his pocket and withdrew the clay disc. "Do you recognize this?" Dr. Marin stopped. Her entire demeanor shifted as she stared at the object in his hand. The professional distance melted away, replaced by something more complex: concern, hope, and what might have been fear. "Where did you get that?" she asked quietly. "A girl gave it to my son yesterday, outside the Wellington clinic." He watched her face carefully. "She said she could make him walk." Dr. Marin was silent for a long moment. Finally, she gestured toward her office. "Come with me." The office was small and cluttered, with medical texts crammed onto sagging shelves and more children's artwork on the walls. Dr. Marin settled behind a desk that had seen better days, indicating a plastic chair for Cale. "After you closed the Mira Center," she began, her voice tight, "several of us continued working with the children who needed us most. Underground, you might say, in basements and community centers wherever we could find space." She picked up a framed photograph from her desk, studied it before passing it to Cale. It showed a younger Nia, maybe 9 or 10, sitting cross-legged on a carpet. She was demonstrating something with her hands to a circle of younger children. "Nia lived with me for 3 years, Marin continued. She was extraordinary. The techniques Elena was developing at the center, Nia took them further than we ever imagined possible. She didn't just learn the exercises, she reinvented them, made tools out of whatever she could find, bits of string, rocks with specific textures, salvaged electronics." "But how?" Cale leaned forward. "She's just a child. A child who understood the prison of her own body better than any doctor could." Marin's eyes grew distant. "She has the same condition as your son, congenital hypokinesia, but she refused to accept the limitations. She worked with what she had, experimented on herself, created methods that shouldn't work according to any medical textbook. But they did work. We watched her teach herself to walk, to dance, to climb." Cale thought of Tim, lying still in his specialized bed. Why isn't this documented? Why hasn't anyone published a paper? Patented a treatment? Marin's voice grew sharp again. That's exactly the kind of thinking that destroyed what Elena was building. Nia isn't a case study, Mr. Varon. She's a child who turned her pain into purpose. She helps other children because she knows what it's like to be trapped inside yourself, not because she wants to revolutionize medical science. She stood, moving to the window. 2 years ago, social services decided I was too old to be her guardian. They moved her to a group home. She ran away within a week. I still see her sometimes, but she turned back to face him. If you're thinking of approaching her like a business opportunity, don't bother. She'll never let you near if you treat her like a case study. She needs belief, not contracts. Cale felt the weight of the clay disc in his pocket, remembering how Tim had clutched it all night. He stood, nodding slowly. Thank you, Dr. Marin. Outside, the midday sun had finally broken through the clouds. Kyle's driver stood by the car, door open and waiting. But for once, Kyle wasn't thinking about his next meeting or the emails piling up on his phone. He pulled out his phone and spoke to his driver. We're going to find her. The Blacktown car crawled through narrow alleyways, its polished exterior out of place among the graffiti-covered walls and overflowing dumpsters. Kyle's security team had tracked Nia to this area, a maze of condemned buildings and forgotten spaces. They found her exactly where their intelligence suggested, curled up in a metal stairwell, a tattered sleeping bag her only protection against the morning chill. The moment their headlights swept across her makeshift bed, Nia bolted upright. Before anyone could exit the vehicle, she was running. Stay here, Cale ordered his security team already out of the car. His expensive shoes slapped against wet pavement as he pursued her through the urban labyrinth. Despite her bare feet, Nia moved with surprising agility, ducking under pipes and squeezing through gaps in chain-link fences. The chase ended behind an old storage unit, its rusty walls creating a dead end. Nia pressed her back against the metal, chest heaving, eyes wild but determined. She didn't speak, just stared at him with that same unflinching gaze from their first encounter. Cale caught his breath, conscious of how absurd they must look. A man in a three-piece suit cornering a barefoot child in an alley. He kept his distance, remembering Dr. Marin's warning about approach. "I talked to Dr. Marin," he said carefully, watching Nia's expression. "She told me what you can do, what you've done for other children." Nia's face remained impassive, but her shoulders tensed at the mention of Dr. Marin's name. "I have a proposal for you," Kyle continued. "Stay in my guest house for 1 week. Work with Tim. No strings attached, just give him a chance." Nia's first words were barely above a whisper. "Where?" "I have a penthouse in—" "No." Her voice grew stronger. "Sessions happen outside. Neutral ground or nothing." Cale frowned. "Why?" "Because you're used to controlling rooms." Nia's gaze never wavered. "I'm not—" The answer caught him off guard. He studied her, this child who spoke with such certainty, who had survived on these streets yet maintained the clarity to help others. After a long moment, he nodded. "There's a rooftop garden," he offered. "Would that work?" Nia considered this, then gave a slight nod. "This afternoon. I'll need to get my things." "I can have someone? I'll get them myself." She slipped past him, pausing at the corner. 4 o'clock. Don't be late. The rooftop garden was a stark contrast to the alley where they'd met that morning. Carefully maintained plants created natural walls around a central seating area, and a pergola offered shade from the afternoon sun. Tim sat in his specialized chair, watching clouds drift overhead while Kyle checked his watch for the 4th time. At exactly 4 o'clock, the elevator dinged. Nia stepped out carrying a worn backpack that seemed to be held together mostly by hope and safety pins. She'd changed into clean clothes, probably from some charity bin, but her feet were still bare. She walked straight to Tim, ignoring Cale completely. Kneeling beside the chair, she began pulling items from her bag. Sponges of different textures, smooth river stones, lengths of string, small bells, and other objects that seemed random but clearly held purpose for her. Cale watched from a nearby bench, fighting the urge to intervene or ask questions. This wasn't like any therapy session he'd witnessed before. There were no medical devices, no charts, no formal assessment tools. Nia worked methodically, stringing up a clothesline between 2 posts of the pergola. She hung the bells at various heights, creating what looked like a makeshift wind chime. Only when everything was arranged to her satisfaction did she turn to Tim. "We're going to make music together," she said softly, her voice gentler than Kyle had yet heard it. She guided Tim's hand toward the nearest bell, not forcing contact, but allowing him to feel its presence. Just like this. Tim's hand twitched, one of his involuntary movements. The bell chimed softly. His eyes widened at the sound, a spark of interest replacing his usual blank stare. A faint smile crossed Nia's face, the first real expression Cale had seen from her. She didn't praise or make a fuss, just waited patiently as Tim processed what had happened. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the rooftop in warm golden light. Tim's hand twitched again, more deliberately this time, and another bell rang out. Then something magical happened. Tim laughed. It was a small sound, barely more than a giggle, but Cale couldn't remember the last time he'd heard it. Cale leaned back in his seat, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as his son created music from his own movements, each chime of the bells bringing more light to those previously vacant eyes. As darkness fell and the city lights began to twinkle, Tim turned to Nia and whispered, "Will you come tomorrow?" The morning sun painted warm streaks across the rooftop garden, catching on the dew that clung to the leaves of potted plants. The air held that special freshness unique to early hours, before the city fully awakened. Tim sat in his chair, already alert and eager, a stark contrast to his usual morning demeanor. His eyes were fixed on the string of bells that Nia had left hanging from the pergola the day before, their metal surfaces glinting in the golden light. From the balcony doorway, Cale watched his son while nursing his second cup of coffee. The dark liquid had gone lukewarm, forgotten in his hand as he observed Tim's unusual animation. Something had shifted in the boy since yesterday's session. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like a window had been cracked open in a long-closed room. Tim's hand twitched toward the nearest bell, not quite reaching it but showing more intentional movement than Cale had seen in months. The medical specialists had always emphasized the importance of managing expectations, of accepting Tim's limitations. Yet here was his son, clearly trying to recreate yesterday's breakthrough. Cale remained silent, afraid that speaking might somehow break the spell of this moment. He'd built his career on careful control and measured responses, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the strange alchemy that had occurred on this rooftop yesterday. At precisely 9 o'clock, the elevator chimed. Nia stepped out carrying a large plastic tray that looked salvaged from a cafeteria. It was filled with an odd assortment of objects that, at first glance, appeared to be little more than junk. Several small bottles filled with different colored sand, a collection of bent forks with their tines spread at various angles, and what appeared to be a child's toy piano, missing more than half its keys. She moved with purpose, setting up her makeshift tools on a small table near Tim's chair. There was something methodical about her movements, despite the apparent randomness of her collection. She arranged everything just so, as precise in her way as any surgeon preparing their instruments. "Good morning, Tim," she said softly, and Cale noticed how her voice changed when she spoke to his son. Gentler, warmer, though still carrying that edge of caution she seemed to wear like armor. Tim's face lit up at her greeting, his fingers twitching with more energy now. Nia noticed and smiled, that same small, careful smile from yesterday. "Ready to wake up those fingers?" she asked, picking up one of the sand-filled bottles. She shook it gently, creating a soft, rushing sound. "Each finger has its own song. We just need to help them remember how to sing it." She placed the bottle in Tim's hand, helping him feel the weight and texture. Then she guided his other hand to the modified toy piano, positioning his fingers over the few remaining keys. "Listen," she instructed, shaking the bottle again. "That's what your thumb wants to say. Can you help it speak?" Tim's concentration was absolute as he focused on his hand. His thumb twitched once, twice, then pressed down on a key. A clear note rang out, mixing with the sound of the sand. Cale found himself holding his breath. "Perfect," Nia said, her voice steady and encouraging without being overwhelming. "Now let's wake up your pointer finger. It has a different song." She picked up one of the bent forks, running her finger across the spread tines to create a gentle chiming sound. Tim watched, fascinated, as she demonstrated how each fork made a slightly different tone. The morning progressed in this way, with Nia introducing new sounds and helping Tim associate them with different finger movements. Each small success was met with quiet encouragement rather than excessive praise, a method that seemed to resonate perfectly with Tim's personality. Cale was so absorbed in watching the session that he barely noticed his assistant, Marcus, approaching from the elevator. "Sir," Marcus whispered, careful not to disturb the therapy session, "the board call is scheduled for 10 minutes from now. They're expecting your quarterly review." Cale didn't respond. He couldn't tear his eyes away from what was happening just a few feet away. Tim had just managed to move his pointer and middle fingers together in a deliberate motion, something that countless physical therapy sessions had failed to achieve. The sound of his son's giggle, twice in 2 days, filled the rooftop garden. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, waiting for a response. After a moment, he quietly retreated, understanding that no answer was coming. The session continued until the sun was high overhead. Tim's movements were small, but increasingly purposeful, each success building on the last. When Nia finally began packing up her unusual collection of tools, Tim spoke up. "Stay for breakfast?" he asked, his voice carrying a hope that was impossible to miss. Nia hesitated, glancing at Cale for the first time that morning. Cale made a subtle gesture to Marcus, who had returned to hover near the elevator. The assistant immediately spoke into his earpiece, and within minutes, a member of the household staff appeared with an extra place setting. The table on the rooftop was already set for Cale and Tim's usual breakfast. The new plate was placed across from Cale's spot, the silverware arranged with the same precise attention to detail as everything else in the Varon household. Nia stood perfectly still, studying the scene before her. Her eyes moved from the plate to Kyle and back again, her expression guarded but thoughtful. After what felt like a very long moment, she stepped forward and took the offered seat. The breakfast that followed was quiet, punctuated only by the gentle clink of silverware and Tim's occasional happy hums as he practiced his new finger movements between bites. Nia ate carefully, with the measured pace of someone who had learned not to take food for granted. Throughout the meal, she watched Cale with subtle glances, assessing him as thoroughly as he had been assessing her methods earlier. When the plates were cleared and Tim was busy playing with one of the sand bottles, Nia rose from her seat. As she gathered her things, her hand moved quickly, almost too quickly to notice, and one of Tim's small finger bells disappeared into her pocket. The motion was smooth, practiced, like a habit she couldn't quite break despite her current circumstances. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Cale's penthouse. The usual bustle of household staff had quieted to a gentle hum, respecting Tim's nap time. Cale found himself wandering the halls, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors. His mind was still processing the morning session, replaying Tim's small victories like a loop of precious moments. He paused mid-stride, his attention caught by a door he usually hurried past. Elena's study. The dark wood seemed to hold years of memories behind its solid frame. He couldn't remember the last time he'd actually opened it, sometime shortly after the funeral, perhaps. His hand hesitated on the handle, cool metal pressing against his palm. With a deep breath, he turned the knob. The door opened with a soft creak, releasing the contained scent of old papers and Elena's favorite lavender sachets. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that cut through the room's dimness. The space was exactly as she'd left it. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with medical journals, therapy guides, and countless folders of research notes. Her organization system had always been uniquely her own, a controlled chaos that somehow made perfect sense to her creative mind. Cale's fingers trailed along the spines of books, collecting dust. The room felt both familiar and foreign, like returning to a childhood home years later. Everything seemed smaller somehow, more fragile than he remembered. Near the window stood Elena's old whiteboard, still bearing her distinctive handwriting. The words jumped out at him. "Children don't fail. Systems do." Below this declaration were bullet points and diagrams, partially erased but still visible. He remembered how passionate she'd been about this idea, that traditional medical approaches often failed to account for the whole child, the whole story. Moving deeper into the room, Cale discovered drawers full of sketches for therapy tools. Some were elaborate designs for expensive equipment, while others showed simple, everyday objects repurposed for therapeutic use. Elena had always believed in working with whatever was available, adapting to each child's unique circumstances. In one corner, a shelf held various prototypes, modified toys, custom-built sensory tools, and what looked like early versions of medical devices. Each item represented hours of thought, of trial and error, of Elena's unwavering dedication to her mission. A manila folder caught his eye, partially hidden beneath a stack of journals. When he pulled it out, several papers slipped free, scattering across the desk. As he gathered them up, one page made him freeze. It was a therapy schedule written in Elena's flowing script. The page was worn at the edges, well handled and marked with coffee stains. His eyes widened as he read through the exercises. There, in detailed notes, was a description of using sound therapy to stimulate finger movement. The diagram showed a setup remarkably similar to what Nia had created with her bells and makeshift instruments. Cale sank into Elena's old chair, the leather creaking softly under his weight. The realization hit him like a physical force. Nia must have seen these notes before. More than that, she must have been one of Elena's patients at the Mira Center. The thought created an unexpected ache in his chest. While he had been focused on spreadsheets and profit margins, Elena had been working with children like Nia, like Tim, children who needed more than what traditional medicine could offer. The afternoon light had shifted significantly by the time Cale made his way back to the rooftop. Tim was already there, awake from his nap and engaged in what appeared to be an intricate game with Nia. They sat cross-legged on a soft mat, surrounded by colored cards and those same musical tools from the morning. Nia was holding up cards in different colors while Tim attempted to tap out specific rhythms in response. Each successful sequence earned him a new sound to work with. The methodology was clear now. She was building on Elena's foundation while adding her own innovations. Kyle approached quietly, not wanting to disturb their concentration. He watched as Tim's fingers moved with growing confidence, still limited, but showing remarkable improvement from just that morning. The joy on his son's face was unmistakable. After a particularly successful sequence, Cale gathered his courage. "Did you know Elena?" he asked softly, his voice carrying across the quiet rooftop. Nia's hands stilled for just a moment. She didn't look up immediately, instead focusing on arranging the colored cards in a new pattern. When she finally glanced at him, her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes held a depth of emotion she couldn't quite hide. "She used to sing while we stretched," Nia said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned back to her work with Tim, but her shoulders had tensed slightly. Kyle felt his throat tighten. "She sang with Tim too," he managed to say, memories flooding back of Elena's gentle voice filling their home with lullabies and simple melodies. As if on cue, Tim began to hum softly, a familiar tune that made Cale's heart skip a beat. It was Elena's favorite lullaby, the one she had sung nearly every night during Tim's early years. The simple melody floated on the afternoon air, carrying with it echoes of happier times. Nia's hands moved steadily, continuing her work with Tim, but a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. She didn't look up, but her smile spoke volumes: recognition, remembrance, and perhaps a touch of healing. The morning sun bathed the rooftop garden in a warm golden glow, highlighting the organized chaos that had taken over the space. What had once been a pristine urban oasis now looked more like a creative workshop, with Nia's collection of therapy tools scattered strategically across the area. Makeshift instruments fashioned from everyday objects lined the walls, wind chimes made from old utensils, balance beams crafted from reclaimed wood, and various containers filled with different textures of sand and pebbles. Tim sat eagerly in his usual spot, dressed in loose-fitting cotton pants and a light blue t-shirt that made movement easier. His eyes kept darting to the rooftop access door, anticipating Nia's arrival. Gone was the blank stare that had been his constant companion just days ago. Instead, his face held an alertness, an expectation that hadn't been there before. Cale observed from his customary bench, noting how Tim had insisted on being dressed and ready a full 30 minutes before Nia's scheduled arrival. The morning routine that usually required careful coaxing had transformed into an eager rush, with Tim using his limited mobility to point at the clothes he wanted to wear. When Nia finally appeared, she carried her usual worn backpack plus something new, a collection of sturdy wooden chairs and what looked like carefully knotted rope. She moved with purpose, hardly acknowledging Cale's presence as she began setting up the day's equipment. Her movements were precise, each item placed with careful consideration. "Today we're going to wake up your middle," she explained to Tim, her voice carrying its usual quiet confidence. She positioned two of the wooden chairs about 3 feet apart, testing their stability on the rooftop surface. From her backpack, she pulled out a series of small bells, each one slightly different in tone. Tim watched intently as she fashioned a simple harness from the rope, weaving it between the chairs to create a swing-like support structure. The bells were attached strategically around the harness, particularly near where Tim's hips would rest. Each movement would create a different combination of sounds, turning the therapy session into a kind of musical exercise. "The bells are your teachers," Nia explained as she helped Tim into the harness. "When you shift right, it sings. When you shift wrong, it's silent." Her hands moved with gentle efficiency, adjusting the ropes until Tim was properly supported. "Your body knows the difference between right and wrong movement. We just need to listen to it." Kyle leaned forward slightly, his fingers interlaced as he watched. The setup looked deceptively simple, but he could see the careful engineering behind it. The bells weren't just randomly placed. They corresponded to specific muscle groups, creating immediate feedback for proper movement patterns. Tim's face scrunched in concentration as he attempted his first weight shift. The bells remained silent. Nia stood nearby, close enough to spot him, but far enough to allow independence. "Try again," she encouraged. "Think about your middle getting strong like a tree trunk." On the next attempt, a single bell chimed softly. Tim's eyes lit up at the sound, and he tried to recreate the movement. Another bell joined the first, creating a gentle harmony. Sweat began to bead on his forehead as he worked to maintain the position. Kale found himself holding his breath as Tim struggled to maintain his balance. The seconds ticked by. 1, 2, 3. Tim's arms trembled slightly, but he held firm. 4, 5, 6. The bells continued their soft song. 7 seconds passed before Tim's strength gave out, and he sagged back into the harness. Where most therapists might have burst into enthusiastic praise, Nia simply said, "Again." Her tone held no judgment, no excessive excitement, just quiet expectation. It was exactly what Tim needed. He took a deep breath and prepared for another attempt. The session continued, with Tim alternating between periods of intense concentration and brief rests. Each success was marked not by verbal praise but by the musical chiming of the bells, creating a language of achievement that Tim clearly understood. As the session drew to a close, exhaustion was evident in Tim's posture, but his eyes shone with quiet triumph. He leaned sideways, naturally seeking support, and found himself resting against Nia's side. Without hesitation or awkwardness, she adjusted her position to better support his weight, her hand steadying his shoulder. Kale rose from his bench, words of gratitude forming on his lips. The transformation in Tim over just 4 days was remarkable, not just in his physical capabilities, but in his entire demeanor. He wanted to express this to Nia, to acknowledge the gift she was giving his son. But before he could speak, Nia was already moving. With careful movements, she guided Tim's hand to the string of bells beside them. Then, without meeting Kale's eyes, she gathered her belongings and walked away. The door to the rooftop closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Kale's unspoken thanks hanging in the air. That evening, Kale stood in the doorway of Tim's bedroom, watching as his son drifted towards sleep. The day's session had clearly tired him out, but there was a contentment in his face that Kale hadn't seen in a long time. "She's the reason I try," Tim said softly, his voice heavy with approaching sleep. The words hit Kale like a physical blow. In all the years of various therapies and treatments, through all the specialists and programs, he had never heard Tim express such a simple but profound sentiment. The painful realization settled in his chest. His son had never said those words about him. Despite all his efforts to provide the best care money could buy, he had never inspired that kind of determination in Tim. The truth of it ached, but it was a necessary pain. Kale stood silently in the doorway, watching as Tim's breathing evened out into sleep, the weight of his son's words settling heavily in his heart. Kale adjusted his tie and faced the wall of screens in his home office. 8 board members stared back at him, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across his desk, highlighting the tension in his shoulders. His fingers tapped once on the polished wood before he stilled them, refusing to show any sign of nervousness. "Your continued absence is concerning, Mr. Varon," said Marcus Chen, his longest-serving board member. "The Mobility Tech Division needs leadership, especially now." The man's normally friendly face had hardened into something Kale barely recognized. Kale's jaw tightened. "I'm fully engaged with operations. My temporary work-from-home arrangement doesn't affect my ability to lead." He kept his voice measured, controlled, just as he handled every crisis that had come before. "With respect," cut in Sarah Blackwood, her crisp British accent carrying a note of challenge, "our competitors are circling. Rumors of your distraction have reached investors. The share price dropped 6 points this morning." She adjusted her glasses, a habit Kale knew meant she was preparing for battle. "Then let it drop," Kale said firmly. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "I built this company from nothing. Every advancement in mobility assistance technology we've developed came from my team, my vision. I won't sell just because the market gets nervous." The irony wasn't lost on him. His company created tools to help people move freely, while his own son remained trapped in his body. "Nobody's suggesting a complete sale," Marcus said carefully, spreading his hands in a placating gesture. "But a strategic partnership?" "No." Kale's response was immediate. "Our mobility tech division isn't for sale. Not at any price." He felt a rare flash of emotion break through his usual composure. The faces on the screen exchanged glances. Sarah cleared her throat. "Kale, we've been patient. But your behavior lately, taking unscheduled time off, missing key meetings, it's unlike you. The Kale Varen we know would never put personal matters above business." "I'm handling a personal matter," Kale said. "It's temporary." He refused to elaborate, keeping his cards close as always. "Is this about Tim?" Marcus asked softly. "We all understand your dedication as a father, but—" "My son is not up for discussion," Kale cut in, his tone brooking no argument. The mention of Tim's name sent a protective surge through him that surprised even himself. While the tense conversation continued in Kyle's office 3 floors below, Maria, one of the housekeepers, crept along the hallway leading to the indoor therapy room. She'd heard whispers among the staff about the strange girl who visited daily, about the miraculous progress young Tim was making. Curiosity had finally gotten the better of her professional discretion. Through the partially open door, Maria held up her phone, recording quietly. Inside, Nia knelt beside Tim, who gripped a specially designed walker. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an almost ethereal scene. The medical equipment contrasted sharply with the girl's street clothes and homemade therapy tools. "Remember what we practiced," Nia said softly. "Feel the ground with your toes first, like playing piano with your feet." Her hands hovered near Tim's elbow, ready to catch him but not touching, giving him the dignity of trying on his own. Tim's face scrunched in concentration. His legs trembled as he lifted one foot, then placed it forward. The movement was small but deliberate. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort. "Good," Nia encouraged. "Now the other one. The bells will tell you if you're balanced." Her voice carried a gentleness that seemed at odds with her tough exterior. Tiny bells tied to Tim's ankles chimed softly as he took another step. Then another. 3 wobbly but distinct steps across the exercise mat. Tim's face broke into a radiant smile, a rare and precious sight that transformed his usually solemn features. "I did it," he whispered excitedly, his voice small but filled with wonder. "You did," Nia replied, her own smile small but genuine. "Want to try again?" She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, trying to hide how much his success meant to her too. Maria's hands shook with excitement as she stopped recording. She hurried to the staff break room, quickly uploading the video to social media with the caption, "Street Girl Miracle, Billionaire's Secret Cure." She never stopped to consider the consequences of her actions. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, tech blogs speculated about revolutionary therapy techniques, and social media exploded with theories about the mysterious girl helping the famous Varen heir. Hashtags formed, theories multiplied, and the story took on a life of its own. Back in his office, Kale was wrapping up the contentious board meeting when his phone buzzed with an urgent alert from his PR team. He opened the message, and the video began to play. His breath caught as he watched Tim taking those precious steps. The sight of his son walking, actually walking, made his heart skip a beat. But it was the interaction between Tim and Nia that truly struck him. The gentle way she guided him, the trust in Tim's expression, the shared joy of achievement. For a moment, Kale smiled, seeing Elena's vision finally coming to life. The warmth he felt was quickly replaced by dread as he realized what this exposure meant. The smile vanished as his phone rang. The caller ID displayed London Child Services. "Mr. Varen," a clipped professional voice said when he answered. "This is Margaret Wells from Child Services. We've received multiple reports regarding a minor in your care." Her tone carried the weight of authority and suspicion. Kyle's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm listening." He shifted into damage control mode automatically. The viral video circulating online shows what appears to be an unaccompanied minor providing unauthorized medical treatment to your son. Our records suggest she may be a runaway, possibly endangered. We'll need to intervene immediately. The woman's voice held no room for negotiation. Kyle stood, walking to his office window. From here, he could see the rooftop garden where Nia and Tim were setting up for their daily session. Tim sat in his wheelchair, laughing as Nia arranged their makeshift therapy tools. Neither had any idea of the storm about to break over their heads. The sight of them together, working in perfect harmony, made something in his chest ache. "Mr. Varon?" the voice pressed. "Are you there?" Kyle watched Tim reach for a bell, Nia guiding his hand with the same care Elena once showed. His throat tightened with an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm here." For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what his next move should be. Cale's footsteps echoed through the stairwell as he descended from his office, each step heavy with the weight of the Child Services call. His mind raced, trying to find a solution that wouldn't destroy the fragile progress they'd made. The sound of Tim's laughter drifted down from above, pure and uninhibited, a sound so rare it made his chest ache. As he pushed open the door to the rooftop garden, warm afternoon sunlight washed over him. The space had transformed over the past few days. Clotheslines crisscrossed overhead, strung with bells and colorful strips of fabric. Makeshift therapy tools lay scattered across blankets and mats. Bent spoons tied together with string, smooth river stones arranged in patterns, and a collection of sponges in different sizes. Tim sat in his therapy chair, face lit up with concentration as he gripped a yellow sponge in his weaker hand. Nia knelt beside him, her hands hovering near but not touching, giving him space to try on his own. "Remember how we practiced," she said softly. "Think about the weight first. Feel it sitting in your palm." Tim's tongue poked out slightly as he focused. His fingers trembled but held firm around the sponge. "Now picture where you want it to go," Nia continued. "Like we did with the bells. Make a path in your mind." With visible effort, Tim drew his arm back. The movement was jerky but determined. He released the sponge, and it sailed through the air in a wobbly arc, landing in a bucket several feet away. The splash made him laugh, a bright, clear sound that echoed across the rooftop. "I did it," Tim exclaimed, looking at Nia with shining eyes. "Did you see?" "I saw," she said, allowing herself a small smile. "Want to try with the blue one? It's a little heavier." Kyle watched from the doorway, struck by how natural they looked together. In just a few days, Nia had accomplished what years of conventional therapy couldn't. She'd given Tim hope. The thought of disrupting this progress made his stomach turn, but the Child Services deadline loomed. "Nia," he called out, keeping his voice steady. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" She glanced up, wariness flickering across her face. After ensuring Tim was secure in his chair with another sponge to practice with, she walked over to where Cale stood. "There's been a complication," Cale began, choosing his words carefully. "Someone in the household recorded one of your sessions with Tim and posted it online. The video has gone viral." Nia's posture changed instantly. Her shoulders tensed, and the openness she'd shown with Tim vanished behind a carefully blank expression. She took a small step backward, creating distance between them. "Child Services called?" Cale continued, trying to maintain eye contact. "They're concerned about the situation. They want to take me away," Nia finished flatly. Her eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape routes. "Put me back in the system." "We can find a solution," Cale said quickly. "I have lawyers, resources. We can work something out that allows you to continue Tim's therapy legally." Nia's laugh was sharp and bitter. "In a courtroom? With papers and judges?" She shook her head, taking another step back. "I told you from the start. Rooms like this take things away. They always do. This is different, Kale insisted. I can protect you. Like you protected the Mira Center? The words hit like a physical blow. Nia's eyes were hard now, all trust evaporating. You think contracts and money fix everything, but they don't. They just build bigger cages. From behind them came a sudden movement and a sharp cry. They both turned to see Tim, who had tried to reach for a fallen sponge, losing his balance. His chair tipped, and he tumbled onto the rooftop tiles with a thud. Nia moved instantly, crossing the space in quick strides. She reached Tim just as he started to push himself up, her hands moving to support his back. "Don't touch him." Kale's shout was instinctive, protective, and immediately regrettable. The words hung in the air like physical things. Nia's hands froze inches from Tim's shoulders. She stayed perfectly still for a moment, then slowly withdrew her touch. Rising to her feet, she brushed the dust from her knees with deliberate care. Without a word or backward glance, she walked to the rooftop door. Her footsteps were silent as she disappeared into the stairwell, leaving behind a heavy silence. Tim sat on the tiles, still holding the wet sponge that had slipped from his grasp. His lower lip trembled as he looked between the empty doorway and his father, confusion and hurt written across his face. Tears welled in his eyes, threatening to spill over. The sun continued to shine on the rooftop garden, warming the scattered therapy tools and making the bells glint overhead. But the space suddenly felt colder, emptier, as if all the progress and hope of the past few days had walked out with Nia. The morning after Nia's departure hung heavy in Kale's penthouse. Gray clouds pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting shadows across the pristine dining room where Kale sat alone at the massive table. His breakfast, a perfectly arranged plate of poached eggs and avocado toast, remained untouched, growing cold in the silence. The house staff moved quietly around him, their footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. They'd already tried twice to coax Tim from his room, but the boy remained buried under his blankets, refusing even his favorite breakfast smoothie. The clay disc with its 3 spirals lay clutched in his small hands, a tangible reminder of what they'd lost. Kale's coffee had long since gone cold, but he couldn't bring himself to ask for a fresh cup. His tablet displayed dozens of missed calls and urgent emails, board members demanding explanations, PR teams seeking direction, lawyers offering strategies. He ignored them all, his thoughts fixed on the moment everything had shattered. "Don't touch him." The words echoed in his head, each repetition a fresh reminder of his mistake. He'd acted on instinct, yes, the protective reflex of a father. But in that split second, he'd confirmed every fear Nia carried about adults who claimed to help, but ultimately pushed her away. A soft thud from upstairs made him look up. Through the open concept design of the penthouse, he could see Tim's door remained firmly shut. The boy had barely made a sound since yesterday, a return to the quiet withdrawal that had defined him before Nia arrived. Kale pushed his plate away and pulled out his phone. His finger hovered over his assistant's number. She could mobilize a search team, contact shelters, put out carefully worded inquiries. But Marin's warning rang in his memory. "She'll never let you near if you treat her like a case study." Instead, he scrolled to Marin's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying the clatter of dishes in the background. "I wondered when you'd call," she said, not unkindly. The sound of running water stopped, and Kale could picture her in her small kitchen, probably preparing tea in one of the mismatched mugs he'd seen during his visit. "I need to find her," Kale said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "Tim won't, he's not—" He stopped, composing himself. "I made a mistake." "You made her feel replaceable," Marin replied bluntly. A chair scraped across linoleum as she sat down. "She's had enough of that for one life." The truth of it stung. Kale pressed his fingers against his temples, fighting back a headache. "I was trying to protect them both. The child services call—" "Was exactly what she expected," Marin cut in. "Systems failing her again. Adults choosing control over trust. Tell me, Kale, what were you really afraid of? That she'd hurt Tim? Or that she'd succeed where you couldn't?" The question landed like a physical blow. Kale stood up from the dining table, needing to move. He walked to the windows, watching rain begin to spot the glass. "Where would she go?" he asked finally. Please, you must have some idea." The silence on the other end stretched. He could hear Marin's slow exhale, could almost see her weighing her words. "I don't know," she said at last. "She has hiding places, learned them from running. But she never shared them, not even with me. It was her way of staying safe." Kyle's reflection stared back at him from the window, tired and drawn. Movement behind him caught his eye. Tim had finally emerged from his room. The boy wheeled himself slowly to the large window in the living room, not looking at his father. "I need to go," Cale said into the phone. "Thank you for—" He stopped as Tim raised his hand to the glass. Using his finger, Tim began to draw in the condensation from the rain-chilled window. His movements were shaky, but deliberate. Slowly, a crooked circle took shape. Inside it, with painstaking care, Tim added 3 spiral lines. Cale's breath caught. It wasn't a random doodle or a child's attempt at art. It was a message, the same symbol from the clay disc, from Elena's old brochures, from every success story that had come out of the Mira Center. "I'll call you back," he said quickly to Marin, ending the call before she could respond. He hurried to his office, pulling open drawers, until he found the box of Mira Center documents he'd retrieved that first night. Inside, beneath the brochures and photos, lay a worn address book. Kyle flipped through the pages, scanning lists of therapy locations, volunteer homes, and safe houses that had once been part of Elena's network. Some would be gone now, converted or demolished in the years since the center closed, but others might still exist. Quiet corners of the city where a girl who knew how to disappear might feel safe. He grabbed a pen and began marking addresses, his hand moving quickly across a fresh sheet of paper. Each location represented a possibility, a chance to undo his mistake. Behind him, through the office doorway, he could still see Tim at the window. The boy's hand rested on the glass just below the symbol he'd drawn, waiting, hoping, believing in the connection that symbol represented. The rain fell harder outside, streaming down the windows and blurring the city beyond. Somewhere out there, Nia was hiding, probably wet and cold, carrying the weight of yet another adult who had failed to understand what she needed. Cale bent over the address list, his pen moving faster, determined not to let that failure be the end of their story. The storage unit's metal door groaned as Cale pushed it open, releasing a cloud of dust that made him cough. Afternoon light filtered weakly through a single grimy window, illuminating rows of filing cabinets and shelves stacked with forgotten therapy equipment. The musty smell of abandonment hung heavy in the air. He pulled the chain on an overhead bulb, which flickered reluctantly to life. The space felt smaller than he remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of memories pressing in on him. 5 years ago, he'd ordered everything from the Mira Center to be packed away here, treating Elena's life's work like just another failed business venture to be archived and forgotten. Cale moved deeper into the room, his expensive shoes leaving prints in the dust. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each labeled in Elena's neat handwriting. Sensory tools, progress records, research notes. His throat tightened as he recognized items from her therapy sessions. Worn exercise mats rolled into tubes, hanging chimes now silent and tarnished. Bins of textured objects she'd used to help children explore touch and movement. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a filing cabinet, sat a box he'd never seen before. The label read simply, "Programs, Unfinished." His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it, carrying it to a small metal desk by the window. Inside were folders filled with Elena's planning notes, sketches for therapy equipment she'd wanted to develop, and grant proposals she'd never had the chance to submit. At the bottom of the box, a manila envelope caught his attention. Unlike the other items, which showed signs of frequent handling, this envelope was sealed and pristine. Written across the front in Elena's hand were 4 simple words, "In case of me." Kyle sank into the desk chair, its ancient springs protesting. For several long moments, he just stared at the envelope, his heart pounding. Finally, with careful movements, he broke the seal and reached inside. A single Polaroid photograph slid out. The image showed Elena sitting cross-legged on a blue therapy mat, her dark hair pulled back in its usual messy bun. Next to her sat a tiny girl with wild curls, Nia, maybe 4 or 5 years old. They were both laughing at something off camera, Elena's arm wrapped protectively around the child's shoulders. The joy in their faces was palpable, genuine, untouched by the shadows that would come later. Cale turned the photo over with unsteady fingers. Elena's message, written in her characteristic flowing script, made his chest constrict. "If anything happens to me, Cale, watch over her. She's the one. She'll fix what we couldn't." The words triggered a rush of memory so vivid it stole his breath. That final morning, Elena rushing out the door, late for an appointment she wouldn't tell him about. He'd been irritated, preoccupied with a board meeting. She'd tried to get his attention to make him understand the importance of where she was going, but he'd barely looked up from his phone. "This could change everything," she'd said, her hand on the doorknob. "Promise you'll listen when I get back?" Sure, he'd replied absently. "We'll talk later." But later never came. The rain had been heavy that day, the roads slick. The other driver had run a red light, and Elena had died carrying adoption paperwork for Nia. Paperwork he'd never known about until this moment. The reality of what he'd done crashed over him, not just closing the Mira Center, not just abandoning Elena's vision, but leaving a child who had meant so much to her, who she had wanted to make part of their family. He'd been so wrapped up in his own grief, so determined to shut away anything that reminded him of Elena, that he'd never even asked what else had been lost that day. "I left you both," he whispered into the dusty silence. His voice cracked on the words, and he pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting back tears that had been years in coming. When he could trust himself to move, Cale carefully tucked the photo into his jacket pocket and left the storage unit. The drive home passed in a blur of rain-slicked streets and tumbling thoughts. By the time he reached the penthouse, evening was settling over the city, painting the clouds in deep purples and grays. He found Tim in the living room, positioned by the window where he'd drawn the spiral sun that morning. The symbol had faded, but Tim's finger traced its ghost on the glass, over and over. "Tim," Kyle said softly, pulling a chair close to his son's wheelchair. "There's something I need to tell you, about Nia and about Elena, your mother." Tim's hand stilled on the glass. He turned to look at his father, his eyes carrying that same quiet wisdom that sometimes caught Cale off guard. Slowly, carefully, Cale explained everything, about Elena's work with Nia, about the adoption papers, about the message he'd found today. As he spoke, he took out the Polaroid, holding it where Tim could see. The boy studied it intently, his small fingers ghosting over Elena's smiling face. When Cale finished, silence filled the room. Tim continued to look at the photo, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "So she's not just like me. She was me." The simple truth of it struck Cale speechless. Of course, this was what Elena had seen, what she'd tried to tell him. Nia wasn't just another patient or a miracle worker. She was the child Elena had chosen, the one she'd believed could carry forward her work of healing. And in helping Tim now, Nia was completing a circle that should have been unbroken. Kyle pulled out his phone and dialed Marin's number. This time, when she answered, he didn't ask where to find Nia. Instead, he said the words that had been building in his throat all afternoon. "I need your forgiveness," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For what I did to the center, to Elena's work, to Nia. I didn't understand then, but I do now. And I'm so sorry." The glass doors of St. Martin's soup kitchen swung open, letting in a gust of cold night air and rain. Heads turned as Cale Varon stepped inside, his tailored suit and leather shoes marking him as distinctly out of place among the worn tables and institutional green walls. Water dripped from his dark hair onto his shoulders, creating dark patches on the expensive fabric. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to spotlight his intrusion into this world of need and humble survival. The volunteer behind the serving counter, a middle-aged woman in a hairnet and apron, stopped ladling soup mid-motion, her eyes widening in recognition. Another volunteer hurried forward, already reaching for the donation forms they kept near the register. her face brightening with hopeful anticipation. "Mr. Varon, what an unexpected honor. We're so grateful for any support." "I'm not here to donate," Cale interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. He shrugged off his wet coat, droplets spattering the linoleum floor. "I'm looking for a girl." The volunteer's welcoming smile faltered, uncertainty creeping into her expression. She glanced around the room, taking in the scattered occupants. Mostly older men hunched over steaming bowls, a few families with children, some teenagers seeking shelter from the rain. Her hands fidgeted with her apron ties, unsure how to respond to his unusual request. Kyle moved past her, his eyes scanning the room methodically. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, making everyone look more tired, more worn. The air smelled of vegetable soup and damp clothes, undercut by the sharp tang of industrial cleaner. His expensive cologne seemed out of place here, another reminder that he didn't belong. He walked slowly between the tables, ignoring the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed in his wake. A few people shifted in their seats, some pulling their belongings closer, others turning away as if to avoid notice. But Cale wasn't interested in them. His focus was singular, his mission clear. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a support column, he spotted a familiar figure. Nia was curled up on a metal folding chair, her coat wrapped tightly around her knees like a blanket. Her wild curls were damp from the rain plastered against her temples. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than she had on his rooftop, but no less fierce. Even in rest, there was a wariness to her posture, like an animal accustomed to fleeing at the first sign of danger. As if sensing his presence, one of her eyes opened, fixing him with that sharp, assessing gaze he'd come to know. The moment she registered who was standing there, her body tensed. In one fluid motion, she uncurled from the chair and grabbed her backpack, ready to bolt. Her fingers gripped the worn straps with practiced urgency. Cale moved quickly but carefully, not wanting to startle her or draw more attention than he already had. He lowered himself to one knee in front of her chair, putting himself below her eye level. His expensive trousers soaked up water from the floor, but he didn't seem to notice. The gesture was uncharacteristic for a man who calculated every move, who prized control above all else. "I broke what you built," he said softly, the words carrying clearly despite the background noise of clattering dishes and quiet conversations. "Let me rebuild it. With you." Nia's hand tightened on the strap of her backpack, but she didn't run. Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching his face for any sign of manipulation or deceit. Trust didn't come easily to her, and Cale had given her little reason to start now. Slowly, deliberately, Cale reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the Polaroid photograph. The edges were slightly worn now from being handled, but Elena and young Nia's smiles remained bright and clear. He placed it carefully on the scratched Formica table between them, a bridge across the chasm of their differences. "She chose you before she was gone," he continued, his voice rough with emotion but steady. "I didn't listen. I'm listening now." Nia's gaze dropped to the photograph. For a long moment she stood perfectly still, staring at the image of her younger self wrapped in Elena's protective embrace. A muscle worked in her jaw, and her fingers flexed on the backpack strap. Memories flickered behind her eyes, of warmth, of safety, of possibilities that had been snatched away. The sounds of the soup kitchen seemed to fade away, the scraping of chairs, the murmur of conversations, the distant rumble of traffic outside. In that moment, it was just the two of them and the weight of everything that had been lost. The years between them, filled with pain and missed connections, hung in the balance. Finally, Nia moved. Not toward the door as Kyle half expected, but back to her chair. She sat down slowly, her movements careful and controlled. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but carried the same strength he'd heard that first day in the rain. "Only if it's mine to build." Kyle didn't hesitate. Completely. The single word hung between them like a promise, or perhaps a prayer. Neither spoke again. They sat in shared silence as rain continued to drum against the windows, its steady rhythm somehow soothing now rather than oppressive. Outside, the city rushed on, heedless and hurried. But inside this worn-down corner of a soup kitchen, something fragile and important had begun to heal. A new foundation was being laid, brick by careful brick, in the ruins of what had been destroyed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the crumbling facade of the Mira Center. Kyle and Nia stood side by side on the overgrown path, taking in the sight of the abandoned building. Nature had begun to reclaim the structure. Thick vines snaked up the weathered brick walls, their tendrils pushing through cracks in the mortar. A layer of grime coated the windows, turning what should have been clear glass into murky mirrors that reflected nothing but gray shapes. The front garden, once meticulously maintained, had grown wild and unruly. Weeds pushed up through the cracked concrete of the walkway, and untrimmed bushes sprawled across what used to be neat flower beds. The metal sign that once proudly displayed Mira Center for Child Neurotherapy hung askew, its letters faded and peeling. Kyle reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an old brass key. It was tarnished with age, but still solid, its teeth unmarred by time. He turned it over in his hand, remembering how many times Elena had used it, how her fingers had worn smooth spots in the metal. "I kept it," he said quietly, more to himself than to Nia. "I'm not sure why." The gate creaked loudly as he inserted the key, rust flaking off the hinges. For a moment, he worried it wouldn't turn, that time had sealed this place shut forever. But with a firm twist, the lock clicked open. The sound echoed in the empty courtyard like a bell announcing their arrival. They stepped inside, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves that had blown in through broken windows. The interior was a testament to years of neglect. What had once been bright, welcoming therapy rooms now stood silent and decaying. Torn exercise mats lay scattered across the floor, their blue vinyl covering split and curling at the edges. Mirrors that had once helped children watch and correct their movements were now cracked, creating spiderweb patterns that fractured their reflections into countless pieces. Water stains spread across the ceiling like dark continents on a pale map, evidence of countless rainstorms that had found their way inside. The air smelled of mold and dust, with an underlying hint of the antiseptic cleaners that had once kept the place spotless. Nia moved through the space with careful steps, her eyes taking in every detail. Her fingers trailed along the wall as she walked, leaving clear lines in the dust. She paused when she reached the mural that covered the entire length of the main therapy room. The painting, though faded, still held its power. 3 children stood hand in hand, each holding a spiral sun above their head. The colors had dulled with time, but the joy in their painted faces remained clear. Nia's breath caught as she studied the middle figure, a girl with wild curls and determined eyes, looking remarkably like her younger self. "Elena designed it," Kale said, his voice soft in the empty room. He stood a respectful distance behind her, watching as she traced the outline of the painted child's face. She wanted every child who came here to see themselves represented, to know they belonged. Nia's hand dropped to her side, but her eyes remained fixed on the mural. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of memory and loss. Finally, Kale spoke again, choosing his words with careful precision. This was her dream. He gestured to the space around them, encompassing both its former glory and current decay. But now it has to be yours. Nia turned away from the mural, moving with purpose toward a door partially hidden behind a fallen bulletin board. She pushed it open, revealing a small storage closet. The space was tight, barely big enough for a child to sit in, but Nia's expression softened with recognition. "I used to hide here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "when the exercises got too hard, or when I was scared." She reached inside, pushing aside old equipment and dusty supplies. Her hands found what she was looking for, a stack of color-coded exercise mats, their edges worn but their purpose still clear. Each one represented a different stage in Elena's therapy system: red for beginners, yellow for intermediate, blue for advanced. The colors might have faded, but the methodical progression they represented remained intact. A small smile tugged at the corners of Nia's mouth as she pulled the mats out one by one. "We start here," she said, her voice stronger now, more certain. She carried the mats to the center of the room and laid them out on the floor. Cale watched as she arranged them in a pattern that seemed to make sense only to her. Then she knelt down and pulled a set of old blueprints from beneath a nearby cabinet. Kyle joined her on the floor, his expensive suit gathering dust as he spread the blueprints out between them. Nia produced a pencil from her pocket and began to sketch over the original plans, her quick strokes suggesting new possibilities for the old space. Together they bent over the papers, their shadows merging in the dusty sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows. The sound of pencil on paper mixed with the occasional rustle of shifting blueprints, creating a quiet symphony of purpose and renewal. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Tim sat in his wheelchair by the window, his small hands pressed against the glass as he watched the street below. His breath created little clouds of fog on the cool surface, expanding and contracting with each anxious exhale. The familiar black town car pulled up to the curb and Tim's heart quickened. The back door opened, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, stepping out into the morning sun was Nia, but different somehow. She wore clean clothes that still carried her practical, modest style. Dark jeans without holes, a simple gray sweater, and sturdy boots that looked new but already broken in. Her hair was neat but natural, pulled back in a way that showed her face clearly. Tim's eyes widened. He pressed his nose against the glass, leaving a bigger smudge as he tracked her movement toward the building entrance. Something had changed, not just in her appearance but in the way she carried herself. Her steps were purposeful, confident yet still distinctly Nia. The elevator chimed its arrival on their floor. Tim wheeled himself toward the foyer as fast as his arms could manage, nearly colliding with a side table in his haste. The doors opened, and Nia stepped out, carrying a canvas bag filled with what looked like therapy supplies. Their eyes met, and a wordless understanding passed between them. No grand gestures were needed. They were simply picking up where they'd left off, but on new terms. Tim's face broke into a wide smile, and Nia returned it with a small one of her own. "Ready to work?" she asked, adjusting the strap of her bag. Tim nodded eagerly, already turning his wheelchair toward the rooftop access. The rooftop garden welcomed them with gentle morning breeze and the soft rustle of potted plants. Nia set up their workspace differently this time. Instead of arranging everything herself, she laid out the tools and looked at Tim expectantly. "Today," she said, pulling out a sleek metronome from her bag. "You're in charge." Tim blinked in surprise. Even Cale, who had been watching quietly from his usual spot, straightened in his chair. Nia placed the metronome in Tim's lap. "You set the pace, you tell me when to speed up or slow down. Your body knows what it needs, we just have to listen to it." Tim's fingers traced the smooth surface of the metronome, exploring its dial and settings with careful curiosity. After a moment of consideration, he set it to a gentle rhythm, slower than their usual pace. Tick, tick, tick. Nia nodded approvingly. "Good choice. Now, show me what you want to work on first." Tim pointed to his hips, then to the balance bars they'd set up the week before. His message was clear. He wanted to focus on weight-bearing exercises. The session unfolded differently than any before. Tim would adjust the metronome's tempo when exercises felt too fast or too slow. He'd signal when he needed breaks, and Nia would respond instantly, always supporting but never directing. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Tim was discovering his own rhythm, his own path to movement. Cale watched in amazement from his bench, witnessing his son's transformation from passive recipient to active participant. Tim's face showed intense concentration, but also joy, the pure satisfaction of being in control of his own progress. Halfway through the session, Nia pulled out a small camera. "This is for us," she explained, positioning it carefully, "so we can track what works best." Her emphasis on us was subtle but clear. This footage was private, protected, meant only for their small circle of trust. The camera captured everything: Tim's determined expression as he gripped the support bars, the way his legs trembled but held as he shifted his weight, the moment his feet found their placement on the floor. Each small victory was documented, creating a record of progress that belonged to them alone. As the afternoon sun began to dip, Nia unveiled her latest innovation, a modified medical brace. She had reconstructed it using parts from different supports, creating something uniquely suited to Tim's needs. The adjustments were precise, showing hours of careful engineering. "Let's try this," she said, helping Tim secure the brace around his hips. "It works with your body instead of forcing it." Tim's fingers explored the new support, feeling how it moved with him rather than restricting him. His eyes lit up with understanding. This wasn't just another medical device. This was something made specifically for him. What happened next seemed to slow time itself. With Nia's steady presence beside him, Tim gripped the support bars and took his first step, then another, and another. His movements were shaky but determined, each foot finding its place with growing confidence. Fourth step, fifth step, 5 full steps. Tim's achievement hung in the air like something physical, something you could reach out and touch. He beamed at Nia, who simply nodded, her quiet pride evident in her slight smile. Later, after Tim had been helped to bed, exhausted but happy, Cale found himself in the stairwell. The emotions he'd held back all day finally broke free. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he leaned against the cool wall, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. These were tears of joy, of relief, of hope, emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He didn't know that while he was in the stairwell, Nia had slipped into his office. She placed a folded note on his desk, weighted down by one of Tim's therapy bells. The message was simple but powerful, written in her clear, steady hand. "We're not done until he runs." The morning headlines blazed across digital screens and newspapers, their bold letters seeming to shout from every direction. Varen's prodigy or publicity ploy. The story had broken overnight, carefully leaked by Marcus Chen, a disgruntled former board member with a grudge and a significant short position in Varen Biotech's stock. His calculated move sent ripples through the business community within hours. In his gleaming corner office, Cale stood at the window, his jaw tight as he scrolled through the coverage on his tablet. The articles painted a picture of desperation, a wealthy father exploiting a homeless girl for a miraculous cure, or worse, orchestrating an elaborate scheme to boost his company's stock price. Each headline felt like a personal attack, twisting what he knew to be genuine progress into something tainted. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from PR teams, journalists, and concerned investors. The notifications piled up, each one demanding immediate attention. But it was Dr. Marin's text that caught his eye. "They're trying to make her story small. Show them how big it really is." Her words cut through the noise with their simple wisdom. The emergency board meeting was called for noon. Rather than heading straight to the corporate headquarters, Cale drove to the renovated Mira Center first. The building that once represented his greatest failure now held their greatest hope. He found Nia in what used to be Elena's office, now transformed into her workspace. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by therapy notes and equipment designs, completely absorbed in her work. "They're talking about us," she said without looking up. It wasn't a question. Her fingers never stopped moving across the paper. "Yes," Cale replied, watching her steady hands as she continued sketching. "The board wants to meet. They need to understand what we're doing here." He chose his words carefully, aware of how quickly she could sense manipulation. Nia's pencil paused mid-stroke. "You mean they need to understand what I'm doing here?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, just matter-of-fact. "Will you come?" Cale asked, careful to keep his tone neutral, giving her the space to refuse. He'd learned not to presume her cooperation. She finally looked up at him, her eyes sharp and clear. "Only if I don't have to explain myself." The condition was non-negotiable. The Varen Biotech boardroom was all steel and glass designed to intimidate. 14 board members sat around the massive table, their expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed hostility. When Cale walked in with Nia beside him, the room fell silent. The soft swish of the automatic door closing behind them seemed unnaturally loud. She looked smaller in this setting, but not diminished. She wore the same practical clothes she always did. Clean jeans, a simple sweater, sturdy boots. Her presence seemed to challenge the room's artificial grandeur. She stood without fidgeting, her calm at odds with the tension filling the space. Marcus Chen spoke first, his voice dripping with false concern. "Mr. Varon, the board has serious questions about this unconventional arrangement. The liability alone," his manicured hands gestured dramatically toward Nia, "is covered," Kale interrupted smoothly. "But that's not why we're here." He refused to let them frame this as a problem to be managed. Nia moved forward, placing a tablet on the table without a word. She pressed play and stepped back, letting the video speak for itself. Her confidence in that moment was palpable. The footage showed Tim in the renovated therapy room. He stood between the parallel bars, but wasn't holding them. The camera captured his face, focused, determined, alive with purpose. Then slowly but surely, he began to move. 1 step, 2, 3, 10 seconds of independent movement, his body finding its own rhythm, his balance adjusting naturally. The transformation was unmistakable. The boardroom remained silent as the video ended. Several members leaned forward, their earlier skepticism wavering. The evidence before them couldn't be dismissed with corporate talking points. Kale stood, his voice firm but quiet. "What you just saw isn't a miracle or a publicity stunt. It's the result of letting go of our assumptions about how healing should work." He glanced at Nia, who remained still, her face impassive. "She didn't save my son. She taught him to save himself." The silence that followed felt different, thoughtful rather than hostile. Sarah Martinez, the head of research and development, was the first to speak. "The implications for our therapeutic approach." She trailed off, shaking her head in wonder. Her eyes kept darting back to the frozen image of Tim on the tablet screen. "I moved to fund the complete reopening of the Mira Center," she continued, straightening in her chair. "As a public-private hybrid facility, we can't keep this behind corporate walls." Her voice grew stronger with each word. The vote that followed wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Marcus Chen and his allies found themselves outnumbered as the majority of the board recognized the potential of what they'd witnessed. The shift in the room was almost physical, from suspicion to possibility. As people filed out of the boardroom, Kale noticed Nia had already slipped away. He found her in the building's lobby, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a thick folder of blueprints tucked under her arm. Sunlight streamed across her face as she gazed out at the city. "You don't owe me gratitude," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I owe you space." He understood now what she needed most. Nia turned slightly, the afternoon light catching her profile. "Good," she replied, her voice carrying a hint of approval. "Because I need it." The words were simple but carried the weight of trust beginning to form. Without another word, she turned toward the exit, her steps purposeful as she headed in the direction of the old Mira Center building, blueprint folder secure under her arm. She walked not as someone escaping, but as someone with somewhere important to be. The morning of the Mira Center's reopening dawned clear and bright, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the freshly painted walls. Where decay and abandonment had once ruled, new life bloomed. The mural that had faded under years of neglect now shone with restored vigor. 3 children holding spiral suns, their faces alight with possibility. Outside, rows of chairs filled the courtyard, creating an intimate amphitheater. Families settled in, many helping their children into seats or adjusting wheelchairs. Several former patients from Elena's time were there, now grown, their faces showing recognition as they looked around at the transformed space. Reporters clustered near the front, cameras ready, while therapists, both veteran and newly trained, gathered in small groups talking quietly among themselves. Nia stood just inside the entrance, away from the growing crowd. She wore a simple blue dress, her one concession to the formality of the occasion, but kept her familiar sturdy boots. Her fingers traced the smooth wall, remembering how it felt when she first arrived here as a scared, angry child who could barely control her own movements. In his office upstairs, Kyle adjusted his tie for the 3rd time, his hands slightly unsteady. The speech he'd prepared sat folded in his pocket, though he knew he wouldn't need it. Some words had to come from the heart. Through the window, he watched more people arrive: board members, medical professionals, and most importantly, families seeking hope. Tim sat in the front row, dressed in his favorite comfortable clothes rather than the stiff formal wear his nanny had suggested. A string of small bells lay across his lap, each one representing a milestone in his journey. He beamed at everyone who passed, occasionally demonstrating how he could now move his fingers in precise patterns to make the bells sing. At exactly 10 o'clock, Cale stepped onto the small stage that had been set up in front of the mural. The murmur of conversation faded as he approached the microphone. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, catching the silver at his temples, evidence of the years and struggles that had brought them all to this moment. "When my wife Elena founded the original Mira Center," he began, his voice steady but touched with emotion, "she told me something I failed to understand at the time. She said that healing isn't about fixing what's broken, it's about discovering what's possible." He paused, looking out at the gathered faces. "I lost sight of that wisdom when she died. I closed these doors, thinking I was making a practical decision. I was wrong." The audience sat in respectful silence as Kyle continued. "But sometimes our greatest mistakes lead us to our most important lessons. Through my son Tim, and through an extraordinary young woman named Naya, I learned what Elena always knew, that the human spirit has capabilities far beyond what we think possible." His eyes found Nia standing quietly at the edge of the stage. "Nia taught me that true healing doesn't happen in boardrooms or laboratories. It happens in moments of trust, in spaces where people are free to discover their own strength." His voice softened. Elena would have loved to see this day. She would have recognized in Nia the same fire, the same unwavering belief in possibility that she herself possessed. Kyle stepped back from the microphone, gesturing for Nia to come forward. She moved to center stage with the same quiet confidence she showed in her therapy sessions. Unlike Cale, she carried no papers, no prepared remarks. She stood for a moment, looking out at the crowd, her gaze particularly touching on the children who watched her with curious eyes. "I learned to walk when no one thought I would," she said simply, her clear voice carrying across the courtyard. "I taught someone else to walk, so now we'll teach the next ones." As if on cue, Tim rose from his seat. The audience watched in amazed silence as he began walking across the stage, dragging a soft rope strung with bells behind him. Each step brought forth a clear, musical chime that echoed through the courtyard. His movements weren't perfect. They probably never would be. But they were his own, achieved through determination and trust. The sound of those bells seemed to transform the atmosphere. Parents of children with similar conditions leaned forward in their seats, hope kindling in their eyes. Medical professionals nodded in appreciation of the innovative approach. Even the most skeptical reporters found themselves lowering their cameras, caught up in the moment's simple power. When Tim reached the other side of the stage, the applause was spontaneous and heartfelt. Nia helped him back to his seat, their movements showing the easy familiarity of two people who had learned to trust each other completely. The ceremonial ribbon cutting followed, with Nia, Tim, and Cale each holding a portion of the oversized scissors. As the red ribbon fluttered to the ground, cheers erupted from the crowd. People began rising from their seats, eager to tour the renovated facility. While the guests filed inside, Cale slipped away from the main group. He carried a carefully wrapped package to the main hallway, where Elena's restored mural served as a centerpiece. With reverent movements, he mounted a bronze plaque beneath it. The metal caught the light as he stepped back, revealing the carefully chosen words: "In memory of those we failed. In honor of those who kept trying. Elena. Nia. Tim." As he stood there, the sound of laughter echoed down the hallway. Tim and Nia's voices intertwined with the musical chiming of bells. The sound bounced off the freshly painted walls, filling the space with joy rather than regret. It was a sound of triumph, of possibility, of promises kept and new beginnings. The bells continued to ring, each chime marking another step forward, their echoes carrying down the corridors of the reborn Mira Center. No longer a monument to what was lost, but a testament to what could be found when people refused to give up on each other. 2 weeks after the Mira Center's reopening, The building hummed with new life and purpose. The halls that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with children's voices, therapy bells, and the steady rhythm of progress. Tim, whose steps grew more confident each day, had claimed his own special role in the center's daily operations. On this particular afternoon, Tim sat cross-legged on a therapy mat, methodically sorting through a collection of different-sized bells. His movements, though still requiring concentration, showed remarkable improvement. He could now reach and grasp with precision, carefully testing each bell's tone before placing it in its designated spot in the therapy kits. "This one's too quiet," he announced, holding up a small silver bell to Nia, who knelt beside him. "The little kids won't hear it well enough." Nia nodded, taking the bell and replacing it with a slightly larger one. "Good catch," she said, her voice carrying the warm approval that had become familiar to everyone at the center. "Remember what we learned about sound traveling?" "Bigger bells, bigger waves, better feeling," Tim recited, grinning as he demonstrated by ringing the new bell with a confident flick of his wrist. The rooftop garden, once their private sanctuary, had transformed into an innovative testing ground for Nia's therapeutic methods. Strings of bells crisscrossed the space at various heights, creating musical pathways for children to navigate. Textured mats in different colors covered sections of the floor, each designed to challenge and support different types of movement. The space perfectly balanced structure and playfulness, much like Nia's approach to therapy itself. In the main therapy room downstairs, Dr. Marin stood in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. A dozen children worked with their therapists, each using variations of Nia's bell-based techniques. Some practiced reaching exercises, others worked on core strength, but all moved to the gentle music of their own progress. The room felt alive with possibility, exactly as Elena had once envisioned it. Nia noticed Dr. Marin's presence and quietly excused herself from Tim's side. As she approached her former mentor, she saw tears gathering in the older woman's eyes. "You're doing what I only dreamed of," Marin said softly, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out and squeezed Nia's hand. "What we all dreamed of." Meanwhile, Kale sat alone in what had once been Elena's office. The space had been completely renovated, yet somehow still held echoes of his late wife's presence. Now it belonged to Nia, and she had made it entirely her own. The walls covered with children's artwork, therapy schedules, and detailed notes on new techniques she was developing. He opened the bottom drawer of the desk slowly, reverently. From his pocket, he withdrew the cracked clay disc, the one Nia had given Tim that rainy day that seemed so long ago now. The 3 spirals caught the afternoon light as he placed it carefully inside. It was no longer just a symbol of what they had lost, it had become a marker of what they had found. Later that afternoon, Kale made his way to Tim's bedroom. The setting sun painted warm stripes across the floor through the half-drawn blinds. Tim lay fast asleep on his bed, his therapy exercises having tired him out in the best possible way. In his relaxed grip, he held a drawing he'd made that day. Kyle gently eased the paper from his son's fingers. The drawing showed 3 figures standing beneath a spiral sun: himself, Tim, and Nia. They were holding hands, and each had a smile on their face. The simple artwork carried all the weight of Tim's journey, their shared healing, and the new family they had somehow become. As darkness fell, Nia stood alone on the rooftop. The therapy equipment had been packed away for the day, leaving only the wind chimes she'd installed along the railings. They sang softly in the evening breeze, creating a peaceful melody that floated out over the city. She heard the roof door open behind her but didn't turn around. She recognized Kale's measured footsteps as he approached and stood beside her, both of them gazing out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice carrying notes of both pride and wonder. Nia remained silent for a long moment, listening to the wind chime's gentle song. Then she spoke, her words careful and clear. "We did something better. We undid the damage." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one above them, while below, the wind chimes continued their endless healing song. 6 months passed like a gentle breeze through the halls of the Mira Center. What had started as a spark of hope had grown into a steady flame, warming and transforming lives daily. The center buzzed with activity, its rooms filled with the sounds of determination, laughter, and the musical chiming of therapy bells. On this particular morning, a group of new children gathered in the main therapy room. Many wore secondhand clothes and carried well-worn backpacks, kids from foster homes and struggling families who might never have received this kind of care before. Their eyes were wide as they took in the colorful space, some nervous, others curious, all full of potential. Nia moved among them with quiet confidence, her newly earned peer recovery facilitator badge catching the morning light. At 16, she was the youngest person ever to receive this certification in the region. The achievement hadn't changed her approach. She still carried the same gentle determination, the same understanding born from personal experience. But now she had something else: official recognition of her gift for healing. Everyone starts somewhere, she told the group, demonstrating a simple bell exercise, and somewhere is exactly where you are. Her words carried the weight of truth. She had once been exactly where they were, uncertain and afraid, but holding on to hope. Down the hall, Tim's voice rang out clear and strong from the Steps and Sounds therapy room. He stood at the front of a small group, his own movements now fluid and confident as he demonstrated a new walking technique. "It's okay to wobble," he called out cheerfully as one of the younger children stumbled slightly. "Wobbling means you're trying something new. Watch this." He deliberately took an exaggerated wobbly step, making the bells on his ankles jingle discordantly. The room filled with giggles, tension breaking like sunshine through clouds. Tim had found his calling in these sessions. He understood better than most the frustration and fear that came with learning to move. But he also knew the joy of progress, the thrill of each new achievement. His laughter was infectious, his patience endless. Under his guidance, therapy became less of a challenge and more of an adventure. Cale walked through the center's halls, pausing occasionally to observe sessions through the large observation windows. Gone were the crisp suits and rigid posture of his corporate days. Instead, he wore comfortable cotton shirts with rolled-up sleeves, his whole demeanor softer and more approachable. Twice a week, he volunteered at the center, helping with everything from administrative tasks to supporting therapy sessions. The transformation in him was as remarkable as any physical recovery. The man who had once viewed everything through the lens of profit and loss now saw the true value of connection, of presence, of small victories celebrated together. He stopped at the wall of success stories, a growing collection of framed photographs showing children and their achievements. Each photo told a story of determination, of barriers broken, of lives changed. Above the photos, gleaming in gold letters, hung the center's motto, "Not just healing, rebuilding." The words captured the essence of what the center had become, not just a place for physical therapy, but a space where broken spirits mended and new futures took shape. As evening approached, the center quieted. The last therapy sessions wrapped up, parents collected their children, and the halls gradually emptied. Nia helped Tim gather his things from the therapy room, both of them tired but satisfied from a full day of helping others. In Tim's bedroom later that night, Nia tucked him in with the gentle care that had become second nature. The room was warm and cozy, filled with drawings of spiral suns and strings of tiny bells that caught the soft lamplight. Tim looked up at her, his eyes serious in the dim light. "Do you think Elena is proud of us?" he asked, voicing the question that often lingered in their hearts. Nia sat on the edge of his bed, taking a moment to consider her answer. Her hand found his, squeezing gently. "I think she always knew we'd find each other," she replied softly, her words carrying the weight of deep conviction. She stood and walked to the door, pausing to look back at Tim, who was already drifting off to sleep, a peaceful smile on his face. As she closed his door quietly, the hallway light cast a warm glow through the house. At the front desk of the Mira Center, in a simple glass box, the clay disc that had started it all caught the evening light. The 3 spirals of the sun symbol seemed to dance under the soft illumination, a reminder of where they had begun and how far they had come. It stood as a testament to the power of connection, of healing, of rebuilding what was broken. The disc had become more than just a symbol. It was a beacon of hope for everyone who entered the center. Like the words that now defined their mission, the steps we take today echo in the lives we lift tomorrow. Mira Center Foundation. If you enjoyed the story of Nia, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.